Hi there. I'm pretty excited because I'm a huge fan of Dark Souls and now Dark Souls 2 beta. So let's get right underway. I'm gonna go dual swordsman because it reminds me so much of Oswald. So much. So the first thing you're going to notice is that particle effects are a lot better in this game. That is probably the largest graphical improvement that I can think of, other than cloth and sort of the way plants, vegetation sort of blows in the wind. But other than that, the graphics they're improved, but they're not leagues and bounds different from Dark Souls. It still retains the fact that, you know, the part of the graphics that I loved about Dark Souls was that armor just looked really good, and that's really carried across to Dark Souls 2 beta, so that is something to be thankful for. In fact, it's better in Dark Souls 2, especially for the dual swordsman, because the cloth physics is good. Well, cloth animations. Anyways, moving on, something that has improved a whole ton has been the UI. The UI is still relatable, it's still what you would expect from Dark Souls. You can still understand it quite readily. The difference is that it looks a whole ton better, and it hides itself if you set it to do so. So, I mean, that's not really a huge deal for everyone. But I definitely know that when I brought this game around to friends' houses, a lot of them didn't want to play it just because of how the UI looked and the character creation process. It just looked a bit ugly. I know that's shallow, but that's generally how people are in gaming. Anyways, so one thing I didn't like about the new UI is that there's no descriptive text for any of the items that you pick up, which could be a huge problem for me, because one of the best things about Dark Souls was the descriptive text. That's pretty much how you learned about the story. You picked up this crazy sword and it had this history about it, and you know, you learn about the world that way, and the more you picked up, the more the pieces of the puzzle sort of fit together. But without that, I don't, you know, like, I really love that storytelling device, and I don't know what they're gonna do without it. I hope that for the beta it's being masked so that you don't learn too much about the story. Speaking of the story, there really isn't anything in the beta that gives away anything. I think probably the biggest tell is what the dual swordsman is wearing. It might, you know, like, he seems to look like Oswald a little bit, which I don't know if that means that the dual swordsman is supposed to be from Kareem. I don't know. Then again, you know, being a beta, you start out at like level 20 something, so you don't even know if these are the armor sets that you pick up. You start off with in the beginning anyway. As for combat and gameplay in general, one of my biggest fears was that under a new director, the game would become more mainstream, more accessible, and therefore easier. Now, there isn't a problem with that, except that lowering the learning curve reduces the reward for pushing through, for beating that boss, for, you know, making that jump. It just lessens the game altogether. The great thing about Dark Souls is that you had to die to learn often, and I think it's a sad thing. You know, I used to take my game around to my friends' houses, Dark Souls that is, and they would die a couple of times and they would just be demoralized and give up. And they could never really grasp the idea that you're supposed to die a lot to learn. You know, you die, you learn from that mistake, and you move on. It's a game. But Anyways, I can gladly say that Dark Souls 2 Beta has retained its difficulty, so I'm really happy. I'm like a kid at Christmas. It's really good to see, you know, like every time you try and pick up not every time, but most times you try and pick up an item and there's a bunch of guys hiding behind the trees that ambush you. It's really cool. The combat is similar, but definitely its own thing. There's definitely a difference in timings, the animations being more fluid. It certainly seems more difficult to get backstab, so I found myself, you know, not really fishing for backstabs or parries, although I couldn't parry with the dual swordsman. I hope to play a different class the next time I go through. Not saying that I didn't like dual swordsman, I really loved it. Anyways, I really hope that you pick up this game. It's really good, and don't be discouraged by dying if you're new to it. That's really sort of the point. But anyways, buy the game. Don't buy too many copies though, otherwise EA will buy the rights to it, and then they'll make it mainstream and accessible and lower the learning curve and make it horrible, although it'll look really pretty under Frostbite. Anyways, you know what I mean. Have a good one.